Welcome back to Deep Thoughts, ladies and gentlemen. Today's episode is going to be called Fictional Realities. And it just occurred to me, sometimes, I look at these titles and I think, wow, how pretentious I'm trying to sound, or how profound I'm trying to sound. I'm really not. I just feel like if you're going to sit down for an hour and watch a guy in black and white smoke a cigar and talk to you, it better be worthwhile. And so I try to design these episodes in my own brain to be fun. And I'm trying to pace in my brain, just like a screenplay, stuff that keeps me emotionally interested. And, there's sort of like when you go to an amusement park, you ride a scary ride, then you ride a really fancy, cool, fun ride, and then you kind of go in between riding someone else's ride in the group. And that's sort of how these topics are. I try to release them so they're not always in order that I make them. Absolutely never in the order I make them. The only thing that happens is sometimes I get excited. I make a video on a particular day, and that goes out that night, just because it's a hot subject. But this is an episode that I don't know if I release. I've done so many episodes. I recorded one called Fragile Realities, and I do not believe I released it. And it was really about people who can't handle reality as most of us observe it, who are awake, and so they retreat to these fictional realities. So this is going to be sort of, I think, a much better format for this. So fictional realities is not just two words put together to sound neat. It is really a subject, and it goes something like this. Probably in the end is whatever reality we want to accept, as long as we do no harm, have at it, right? You can live in a Teenage Ninja Turtle outfit your whole life and never bathe. Do no harm. No judgment from me. But there are folks that are like most of us who have to interact with society, and they will move their mouth and make words, and they can do harm by validating crappy resources, hanging on to realities that are fictional simply because it's more alluring to them. Now, obviously, some fictional realities have absolutely no harm. Again, the guy who's, or the couple that is married who loves to dress in Star Wars outfits, but the second they spawn a child, maybe if they don't let the kid grow up in a normal world, and they're kind of incompatible with society when they grow up, maybe. Who knows, right? Everything in moderation. But I think that this thing between finding reality and finding fiction and making it reality is sort of the diagram where insanity and brilliance touch at the top of the diagram. It's like a snake eating its tail diagram, where the tail is perhaps sanity and the snakehead is insanity. And there's a great comment on, let me see what video this was on. It was on the No Forest on Flat Earth episode. If you want to read a beautiful comment, because I'm not going to read the whole thing here, it's sort of the catalyst for this episode to shake it out of me one more time and say, perhaps we got to go back. The commenter is Dan Nihil, Nihil. It looks like he cut and pasted something he wrote in a piece of software because it has a bunch of carriage returns in it, but it seemed to be directly targeted at this particular video, and perhaps the guy, because it is so well written, has been just pasting it on anything flat Earth, just so that people kind of hear what he's talking about. But he talks about and claims that a paper was written by the Regulatory Affairs or Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs group in 2008, saying that since we're focusing so much on the hardcore realities, like 9/11 being an inside job, Benghazi and all these things, which Benghazi hadn't happened yet, that they actually wrote a paper on how to keep us all off guard. Global warming hoax in there as well. And so they had something called cognitive infiltration. That was the goal of the report and the goal of the actual plan that they wrote, which is to infiltrate those of us who are focusing on the negative stuff, super negative stuff that really affects our lives and beckons to those who control society, and just essentially get us off kilter to flat Earth stuff. So that comment is brilliantly written. Again, it might be pasted in several videos, but it doesn't matter. You should read it, because he talks about how we might be getting polluted. And I think most of us have thought that perhaps flat Earth is a psyop. Especially no Forest for Flat Earth, in my opinion, did nothing but degrade the movement of Flat Earth. So I've been wanting to kind of do a part 2 on the No Forest for Flat Earth, but I don't have an hour. So I'm going to stick some comments in here because it's right along the subject of what we're talking about here. You know, I had watched the original version, and in watching the 80-minute episode, I would rewind and keep watching the areas that were really confusing. And now there's some English overlay versions. And of course, folks don't know that there's another version, and so they think, God, you're a total idiot because you didn't hear the way he beautifully wrapped this thing up. Now, I hang out with some pretty smart people, and I haven't talked to anyone yet who's watched the whole thing, which they all have, the people I'm talking about, who got this huge, beautiful wrap-up at the end of the episode. But again, most of us watch the Russian version. You know, it's a Russian guy speaking English. So, the more I look at the argument, the more I look at the evidence, the more I look at his photographs, it just seems more and more stupid. The whole idea that he's saying no forests on flat Earth, wow, that's super profound. One, he barely talks about flat Earth, but he usurped that little title to insert himself in there. So, again, 5 stars off your 10-star rating because you're cheating to get eyeballs on your video. But his whole theory, now that I've sorted it out, because it was so easy to understand the first time, is that he has deemed these mountains, which have absolutely no biological signature whatsoever, right? There's absolutely nothing organic about these structures. They look like, again, if you understand the crystallization of mass, when molten, drying, and all this other stuff, you got the hexagonal patterns and that kind of stuff. It's absolutely just the straight-up mathematics of something that's a liquid drying while it's moving on a vector, turns into these hexagonal shapes. Depending on the density of the material, it's a larger shape. Some will be 10 feet wide, some will be 8 inches wide. But what he's saying is he reclassifies trees as these fabled mountain things. And one of our listeners reminded me that Graham Hancock actually had talked about this a couple years ago, which is very interesting. I did not know this. But Graham's at a point now where he's almost the next Whitley Strieber. He did some very legitimate research, and I think now he's running dry, and it's probably very difficult to come up with a whole new thing, so now he's reaching. Now, I haven't heard him talk about the forest theory and how skeptical he is about it. So maybe he's presenting it as a much more skeptical idea than that gentleman who made this other video, right? Now, here's the thing. Trees are trees. Ask a botanist what a tree is. And then ask a botanist what a bush is. They have very specific genetic attributes. If you want to call these other things that look like trees, then you better find a new name for them, because they're not trees, even if they were real. To say that there are no forests on flat Earth is to say that there are no humans on flat Earth simply because you found a species of giant humans. You have found a new thing that you call human, a giant. And now you steal from the human species our designation, our label, our species title, and you give it to this new giant species. And all of a sudden you deprecate and declassify humans, and what the hell are we then? Oh, we're dogs now. It's just, people who argue with me on this, I don't really give a shit if you argue with anything, but it just screams at this fictional realities thing. The people that are all butthurt about no forest and flat Earth skeptics are people that need fairy tales in their lives. And the weird thing is the people that really, really want these fairy tale lives, and I mean literally, they want to be in a Sherwood forest with pixies flying around, Excalibur stuck in rocks, Merlin somewhere in the shadows, goblins are running around. Those are fun fictional things that are fun to think about. And maybe at some point we'll find Middle Earth and with all the evidence that these things really exist. But until then, what are we doing to ourselves? I'm always rewarding the idea that one remains skeptical and one takes observable reality and analyzes it. But at some point, to be told, oh my God, look at the top-down diagram he made of Devil's Tower. Doesn't it look like a cellular structure? And then to look at the same person and go, where are the suitcase elevation scans of this thing to make it look like it has a cellular stack? a cellular body of some sort. You're going to have to tell the audience, if you want to think these things are living mother trees especially, right, that these things are somehow living rock. I'm sure maybe there's some life force in all things in the universe, but I'm not the one calling them trees, man. Trees are trees. I'm surrounded by trees. We start the show off with the beautiful backyard that is organic life. I'm not taking a picture of a mountain. This used to be a tree, because that's profound and interesting. But now, what's the difference between someone saying that there were trees that were 60 miles high to 150 miles high, that if they were ever cut down would have to fall, and if they fell, I guarantee you that the impact on the mantle of the earth would be so utterly insane that it would have left a mark for all time. It would have probably, in some cases around the world, shattered the mantle right down to its lava core. There'd be evidence of this thing. If he wants to say that the petrified forest is a bunch of fallen branches, well, then what tree is that falling from? If you believe all this crap, then you should be able to take every one of the mesas on Earth and map them out on a map. Map them out on a flat Earth. Again, because he's stealing all you flat earthers into his stupid theory. Map it out. Show me where the branches are. Hey, there's only one petrified forest that I know of. Where's all the other petrified forests? If these things fell constantly, then wouldn't there be petrified logs in everyone's backyards? Because this thing would be so massive. And what happened to the trunk? You know, at one point he starts showing you photographs of all the horrible clear cutting up north in Northwest America. And then he just literally maps that over to the other thing. And then everyone's getting angry. Everyone's getting angry in the video that somebody cut down these big trees. I mean, whoa. We're just taking fiction and adding more fiction. You know, Michael Rupert taught me something that, you know, he wanted to go after 9/11 as an inside job, but not saying that he said, look, I can't prove to you that no planes existed and no Arabs existed and all this other stuff. So he just said, I'm going to use all the stuff they've submitted and I'm going to present it in a court of law such that I can prove that this was an inside job. And then he just established the lineage of the intelligence agencies and his own bout with the CIA as they, you know, asked him to protect the drug trade. And he didn't want to do it, and then they tried to kill him. And I think that with these theories, it comes down to that every once in a while. It comes down to, instead of just having loose theory here and then loose theory here and loose theory there, and somehow, because you want to believe something interesting today because you're bored to death, because we've had some really good conspiracy theories that are actually far more substantial and observable, that you're willing to entertain yourself by making the jump. And there's nothing wrong with considering everything on planet Earth, right? But it just brought out this interesting group of folks, which, by the way, are not Deep Thoughts listeners. They're brand new folks to the game, right? But now let's take a break from No Forest and let's go off to the other side of the spectrum of fictional realities, because we have individuals that, again, we don't necessarily need to convince them of anything different. I recently made a friend who is super nice guy. He talks a lot, almost as much as me, almost. He likes a couple of fictional franchises in the world, one in particular. If he talks for 60 seconds, he will have mentioned this franchise at least once before he ends his sentences. He ended up working for this organization for a little while. And coincidentally, anytime someone talks about reality being anything different than the sweet fictional franchise that he loves, he can't hear it. He's polite about it. He's extremely mature and polite about it. But you can't shake this guy. And no matter how much evidence you throw at the guy, no matter how much science he doesn't have, background-wise, you can't use science to produce anything, because then he'll just say something like this. And I'm mentioning this guy because we all have one of these guys, if not 10 of these people in our lives. They'll say, well, I looked that up. And I found out that was all crap. I went to Snopes, and they said it wasn't real. Snopes is a fucking government website if you haven't figured that out yet. It is literally the disinformation headquarters that is to counteract and supplant anything that Wikipedia's bullshit website can't convince you of. I mean, it'll be like, the DNC's murdered 6 or 7 people now to protect Hillary Clinton. Murdered, absolutely upstanding whistleblowers. And, you'll look at Wikipedia and they'll just take the police reports and say, oh, he was robbed. Oh, he fell off a cliff. And then you get to Snopes, who'll engage it on a slightly more conspiratorial level. And, Snopes doesn't have anything that's interesting, right? Snopes is completely designed to do nothing more than extinguish the circumstantial tracks right to the truth. So, what I find interesting is this guy has built most of his conscious life out of a fictional franchise. When he opens his eyes in the morning and he looks at reality, it is how much can I make this reality match the fictional franchise that I admire so much. And if you come in, and again, it's absolutely everyone's right to do that. I don't believe he is harming myself because he doesn't try to stop me from talking when I talk about things. He's done it once, but what's really funny is, when you're a rat in a cage, there's 2 ways to experience that. One, watching or being the rat in the cage and constantly bumping into the maze walls and trying to find the cheese. And then there's to sit down and look at it from above and see the whole maze. And you see the little mouse bumping into the walls. And you're like, oh, that's cute. Oh, he's pretty close. Oh, he ran the wrong way. Right? And when you start becoming a truther, you start getting to the point where you can see, you start just pulling yourself out of the maze and looking down at the rat. This guy's a rat in a cage. He was commenting the other day on Stephen King's book being turned into a movie by Stanley Kubrick. And immediately, he just cut and pasted Stephen King's opinion of the movie into the conversation as if it was his own discerning eye. Didn't really have much knowledge about the film, interestingly enough. He goes, oh, well, I didn't like that one. It didn't follow the book very well. Didn't mention the scenes in the book that weren't in the film. I assume he hasn't read it. But it's, hey, I got knowledge about film. Let me impress you here, right? Not realizing that Stanley Kubrick was telling his moon story. He was telling his moon story. The boy with the Apollo 11 sweater who gets up from a launch pad, who goes 237,000 miles away to room 237, hops in there, and something horrible happens to him. But so this guy immediately bumps around the official story and starts, again, just passing out the story that how horrible Stanley Kubrick is. He's a film enthusiast, participates in local film writing outfits, and he will sit in a room and bash Stanley Kubrick. Let me just give you a big heads up here, folks. There's 2 things in the world, if you're in creative writing, that you do not do, lest you remove all doubt about your utter and complete fucking ignorance of the art of writing and filmmaking. You do not, under any circumstance, insult William Shakespeare. Under no circumstance. William Shakespeare had more knowledge under the fingernail of his left pinky than you will ever have in your entire lifetime, no matter how much you devote yourself. And you don't insult Stanley Kubrick. Now, Eyes Wide Shut's the only exception we have to his entire life, but the guy was trying to push a camel through the eye of the needle, basically. He wanted to expose as much truth as he possibly could about this organization, the secret societies at the top, and he thought, well, he literally cast 2 super-duper popular actors, probably not realizing that Tom Cruise was well outside of his prime at the time. Now, Tom has actually, I think, maybe recaptured his prime, but he was nothing hot in the late 90s. And then he just wants to get the image system in your brain about this faction. And I've got friends of mine who are utterly brilliant human beings, like certifiably brilliant, who think that movie's his best work. So they may get it on a level I haven't quite ingested yet. But you don't sit around pissing on, Spartacus, Dr. Strangelove, 2001: A Space Odyssey, Clockwork Orange, The Shining, Full Metal Jacket, Barry Lyndon. You just don't. Because you couldn't hold his fucking jockstrap if you tried, right? So we have people that hang on to fictional realities at a science with a capital S side. And then you have folks that hang on it at the fairy tale side. And I will say to you that, let's say that you're giving the Sermon on the Mount of truth somewhere in your world. And of course, most of us do always probate and realize that we don't actually completely know the truth of anything, usually. More so, we know things that are technically impossible versus things that actually happen. But what these individuals do when they elect to be in this fictional realm and just fight things with emotions is that they choose to essentially walk out of ear range of the mound. And that's fine. Hey man, we all have to go on journeys and do this kind of stuff. But then there's that whole thing of do no harm. And they'll get on channels like this or whatever. And then they start expressing all of their butthurt about subjects. But now let's look at the internet just prior to Flat Earth hitting the airwaves. Because this is what I think is extremely interesting. Last year, Flat Earth seemed to have landed extremely heavily around August of 2015. Between August and December, depending on when you came on board. Well, what was really in the eyes of the people around that time? Well, NASA and every space program on planet Earth was in constant barrage. Hell, even earlier this year, it was constant, utter barrage. And I will say right now, my smoke shop likes to do runs on YouTube of conspiracy theories. We haven't watched an ISS, NASA, SpaceX video in maybe 2 months because we got sidetracked into Flat Earth. Wow. Cognitive infiltration, right? This is where we got deluded into something. Now, I'm always harping against NASA, especially saying that they're ever going to go to Mars in the next 40 years because the reason why they pick Mars is that it's out of sight, out of mind. It's out of sight, out of mind, and therefore they can run the whole operation in some studio and you can't prove it otherwise. It's a very important genetic of their technique. In 1969, out of sight, out of mind was the moon. So Flat Earth is based on out of sight, out of mind claims that the South Pole is not an island, not a continent. It is a barrier around this disk, right? But who the hell can go down there to confirm it? Now, I did want to put a little bit of information in because I've mentioned a couple times that the North Pole and the South Pole have drastic temperature differences. The reason that the North Pole is a lot warmer than the South Pole is that the North Pole doesn't have continents. And so when they measure the temperature, it's pretty much sea level freezing over, which is an average degrees of, I am told, 4 degrees Fahrenheit. The reason why the South Pole has an average degree of 60 degrees below zero is that by the time they get to the South Pole, they're elevated on a continent. And so they are much higher in the atmosphere, thus cooler. So that might explain away that particular issue and why it is different down there. Now, what I don't understand is that there's this, this force line project, and it just seems to be taking forever to prove it one way or the other. And I just think, come on, isn't there one person with money and resources and curiosity that can just do it on the same frickin' day? Get out a laser, maybe a survey team. Start measuring, start figuring this stuff out. It shouldn't take month after month after month, but it seems to be just continuing to propagate without the proof besides people's claims that no one can verify, right? If a gyroscope doesn't turn in the dashboard of a commercial airline, then where is the pilot that's filmed it not turning? You know, putting a camera out a window on a plane 35,000 feet up, you won't see any curvature because you're barely off the ground. You're a couple of molecules off the surface of the Earth at 6 or 7 miles. For those of you who need to know the math on that, we'll give you 7 miles up, which is higher than normal. Divide it by 8,000. And then move the decimal 2 places to the right. That's the percentage off the ground you are. Believe me, you're not going to see any curvature. No, it's just not possible. We don't have pictures of the planet Earth from any of the space stations that are believable, right? They don't match Google Earth, for God's sakes. I mean, at least one of these two have to get it right. But if this is a PSYOP, where would you get confirmation that it's round? You would get it from the space agencies, which could be easily pushed into, concealing information. Maybe. Now, I think that because Flat Earth Conspiracy Online, as presented by Eric Dubay, and I think then tagged on by Sargent and Jeranism and all those guys, I think that the idea that they've been planning this for nearly 50 years, that they were going to create this conspiracy around the world, that the world was flat again, I don't buy that. So there should be a tremendous amount of information and proof in our coffee books and our hard drives, for those of you enthusiasts who download every picture from NASA. We should have extremely credible photographs already that don't argue with each other. But no one's come out to show those off in any of the debunking videos that I've seen. So now let's say that we have a line that is the full spectrum of let's say, fiction and fact. And again, we don't know where we are at any point in that line. We're trying to be in the center, which in this particular case would be the 0 point of all truth. But on the left side, you have your no forest on flat Earth folks that are just literally waiting for fairies to fly out of their butts. And on the right side, you got science with a capital S, where the world's an oblate sphere, according to Neil deGrasse Tyson, and the whole universe started with the Big Bang. So you have the two spectrums of absolute lost nature of mind. And then you have the folks in the center who are probably slightly more agnostic about what they believe to be true because they've been burned enough times that they're like, well, I'm not going to really walk in the room and say it was exactly this way. I'm just going to say that giant 110-story buildings don't fall free fall unless someone's blowing up the building down below the falling floors to make sure there's absolutely no resistance or impact. What happens when you're in a subway and you get on the subway and you're standing up straight and it's all good? Then it starts to move. And it's got the buckle of the clamps between the cars that gets popped as soon as the engine drives forward, which sends a transverse wave from the front to the back, throwing you first back, then forward. And then it clamps down as the velocity starts picking up. And all the little clamps between the cars lock in place, and then you have a constant stream of force backwards as the car's pulling forward. We don't want to fall forward and slam our face into the front of the car. We don't want to fall backwards and slam our head against the back of the car. We want to stay where we are and stay stable, but we understand that the entire time that we're on this subway, because it turns, some of them go up and down a little bit, we're going to have to grab a pole, we're going to have to spread our legs, adjust our center of gravity, and keep a stable as possible posture within the subway. Now, take our line graph, or our line meter of crazy fairy tale behind us, bullshit science with a capital S, pop science in front of us, and let's try to get somewhere in the car where we can observe the front, we can turn around and observe the back, but we try to stay somewhere in the center. On the snake eating the tail diagram, we're on the bottom of its gut, where we have lucidity as much as we possibly can. We have skepticism, we have an open mind, we can take a look at things. If someone is going to bring something from the front and give it to you, or bring something from the back and give it to you, or show it to you, and you're going to observe this new information, we have to figure out a science for us truthers, I guess you could say. Hey, creating a group, but we're not a secret society, we're an open society. But I believe we have to create some mechanism to weigh information and figure out where it goes in our mind. I've talked about on several episodes where you really need at some point after 30, I think, probably more, 35, 40, where you take all the information that you think you've pulled into your brain that's true, and just like a cupboard, you throw it all out the front door, and then you make a gigantic pile, and you bring every piece of information in, and you discern it again with your newfound knowledge, and you do this every 10 years of your life. That one's false. This one's true. This one's in the maybe pile. That one's false. This is true. This is in the maybe pile. Maybe, and I think that what I'm about to say is going to be accurate for a lot of you guys, if you're like me. We have to go, well, here's what I do. Let me just say this. I'm watching the No Force thing. First, again, he's building it up. He's dramatically hiding information, which I think is sort of an asshole thing to do. This isn't a Hollywood production. The truth should not be a Hollywood production, folks. The truth should just simply be, okay, I have a new theory. The new theory is that I believe that gigantic mountains used to be trees, and because I think those are trees, I'm going to take the botanist designation off of what we currently call trees. We're going to call those bushes, because that's so profound, and who the hell knows what you call a bush, right? And that's my theory, and let me tell you how I believe this to be true. Boom, 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 boom. Instead, it was built up just like a screenplay. And you have to wait 80 minutes to get the truth. How many of you hate news at 11? Or they'll say, George Lucas smacks a woman on her ass at a convenience store. News at 11. And it's not there till the last 5 minutes of the news, and it's not what it is. He didn't actually do that, but they tricked you. That's sort of how this dude treated you in this video. There shouldn't be theatrics and truth. That's just my opinion, right? But here's what I did. I watched this show. And once I started grasping what he was talking about, and which really took all the way up to the point where you see Devil's Tower, and you see it, and it looks like a tree, and then he starts showing you tree stumps, like we don't know what those are. And the one that I forgot to mention is he shows a lot of broken tree stumps of trees that have fallen over, and then he shows kind of shardy blades of plates that used to make up some sort of mesa or it was a mountain. And then, of course, plates, when they sink, are going to be these jutting rocks that are up there. And it was really super convincing at one point until you really start looking at what he's trying to talk about. He also said he was going to show you how they chopped them all down, and then he failed to ever say that. He just said somebody did it. But I went into the video, and I started to just believe it. I just let myself fall right into it and went right into his theory, trying to absorb as much of his theory as possible, which, again, in the original version, for me personally, it was extremely difficult for me to understand what he was saying, keep a train of thought at all times. But it did get a little easier towards the end. But once I was done with it, I take a deep breath and I go, that's really fascinating. That's really fascinating. But now it is my responsibility to apply due diligence, to pull back and to compare it to all the other things that we believe also are far more profound with a lot more background, which for me was Expanding Earth. And the funny thing was I actually cut in Neil Adams' video of Expanding Earth, and some people still couldn't get it. Blows me away. Some people thought I support Pangea Drift because I support Expanding Earth. Expanding Earth is the antithesis of Pangea Drift. If you go out and listen to the audio, and I wasn't going to stop and play Neil's video because I think it's, I don't have permission to show the whole video with sound and everything. So it's hopefully that's alluring you, alluring to you enough to search on Expanding Earth, see a 3-minute, 21-second video with his narration of the whole thing, and you'll get it. It's not Pangea. The people were saying, well, do you trust Google Earth? I can't believe you trust Google Earth. And I'm thinking, not everyone was disrespectful in questioning my support of Google Earth, but let me just clue you in on something here, guys. Google didn't invent the contour maps of the oceans. The contour maps of the oceans have been around since sonar could pop the bottom of the ocean, 60, 70 years ago? And this is before we had JFK's assassination. And so that information isn't, submitted by Google. Oh, guys, guess what? The Earth has an ocean. If you can't take every single thing that goes through Google and make it not true. Wikipedia has a formula of like 80 to 90% truth, and then they'll piss on things that expose the ruling class. Snopes, who knows? Snopes has been busted so many times so far. What you have, completely hidden secret society individuals running these websites, and you're willing to say this is true, this is false. And again, nothing they say actually matches observable reality half the time. What's real is that people are being murdered who are on video serving the Democratic National Convention with papers on voter fraud. That's what's really going on. There's half a dozen of them now, murdered, not in the news. If any of you remember the senator from Modesto, California, whose assistant in New York City, I don't know why he was there. I think it was New York City. They found a bunch of sex toys in the guy's closet, but his brunette assistant was brutally murdered in a park. I think it was Central Park or something like that. I apologize if I got the name and places wrong, but she was murdered, and my God, it was in the news for like 6 months to a year. It revealed that he had affairs, and I think his wife almost divorced him, but then she's a politician wife, so she understands that they get a little nookie on the side, and all was okay, I think. Maybe even got divorced eventually. That was actually linked to some pretty interesting stuff, but, 6 people getting murdered, nowhere in the news. Apparently being a Democrat is the most dangerous thing you can do for your life. There's a great song out there called Institution by Suicidal Tendencies. And the whole song is about a kid who's minding his own business. He's a deep thinker. He's absolutely a deep thoughts person in the lyrics. And he is just chilling out in his bedroom, just trying to think about things. But because he doesn't adhere to his mother's template of a child, because he thinks, she comes in and starts questioning him about being on drugs, starts questioning his entire, motivation in life. And he just starts to look at her and says, I did everything that you said. I went to your institutions, your churches, everything that you said. I am a product of every piece of parental guidance that you've given me, and you are concerned about who I am at the end of the day. And so the whole song it's like Latin punk is one that I know most of you have heard it. If you haven't heard it, it's just got some energy in it that's just like, yeah. The guy's just like, fuck you, man. I did everything that you said, and if you don't like who I am, then it's your fault, and get off my back. And by the way, I don't do drugs. It's awesome. Why mention that? Well, that's what's going on right now. Society used to be really well balanced, like I said in a previous episode. Nuclear families. Dad was the breadwinner. Only one person had to be in the slave race. Only one person had to lose their entire life to working and making money. And the moms could stay home with the kids and really live life, raise their mutual genetics, be there when the kids come home from school, be there when it's their birthdays. And Dad had to, kiss ass and do all this shit to come home just to experience his kids before they go to bed. And now it's like, now the mom and the dad are both in the rat race, and they've taught women that this is what they want, or they're not a woman. Ha! Really funny, right? But now we have at least 3 generations. X, Y, well, I guess Y might be millennials, maybe 2 massive generations. And generations are like, 40-year gaps? Something like that, at least 30-year gaps. But we have these generations now, like myself, we're mutts. We came from broken families because our families were convinced to, do all kinds of things that fractured the bond between husband and wife. Anytime now I find one person that has their parents still married, it just blows me away. I'm like, wow, that's amazing. But what's really funny is that even though these individuals are my age, their parents will be 80 years old. I'm like, well, that's why your parents are still together, because they're hanging on to the old ways. They would be hanging on to my grandparents' standards. And hats off to them, right? But here we are, a product of the educational system. And we are now finally taking a step back, and we are smelling the bullshit. We are smelling it left and right. And isn't it interesting that there's some psychopath, crazy person like Hillary Clinton thinks that we have to be exterminated now because We can see that she's a psychopath, crazy woman. We can see it. Zbigniew Brzezinski, who gives his big speech in 2005, I believe, in New York City with We Are Change videotaping him, talking about how they have to assassinate the internet because it's the greatest threat to their stability, the greatest threat to remaining secret. The internet's beautiful. It's paid for by them, and we use it against them. Pretty awesome, right? But we have to have a technique, some sort of methodology, because now we've all come together organically, right? There's all kinds of great channels out there. They create these great videos, and they are from housewives sitting at home to nutbags like me in the backyard on a cement patio, to people doing massive productions like the Black Penguin guy. And we're coming from different walks of life, different skill sets, different camera riggings, different approaches of the way we talk. And it's great because we're all engaging different sectors of society. And we're sort of saying, there's the top of the hill. There's our Fiji mountain right there. And at the very, very top, there's that glowing thing up there. And we think that that's the truth. But it's really freaking steep once you get close to that center point. And so we're trying to figure out techniques to traverse the last part of our particular proverbial Devil's Tower. And I think that perhaps, and I'm sure that I am just a late Johnny-come-lately to this theory, I think that we have to figure out a way, and there's no time schedule on this, but sooner the better, to unite our efforts. Perhaps using a little bit of methodology for how we actually discern reality and figure out whether or not we're living in fictional realities or real realities. And again, of course, if you look at my existentialism episode, we'll play the video game for now. You know, this reality that we're in, hell, maybe it's some sort of computer simulation. One of the listeners made a fantastic comment about flat versus round, and then he pulled back and he said, but if it's just memory in a computer, then it doesn't matter. And for any of you know 3D programming, he's absolutely correct. It doesn't matter because you can make whatever reality you want. There are no rules except those of which have been imposed by algorithms. You think you can't fly? Well, as soon as they change that little line of code, you will. By the way, I've continually asked friends whether or not they have dreams of space. And it's really fascinating because I'll get people that say, yeah, of course I have. And then you go, okay, what was the dream? Well, I don't know. It's like, then why are you saying yes? No one has really, I think one of our listeners, Michael, he said that he's had some sort of kind of zooming through the universe, sort of like Superman dreams, but very quick sort of abstract dream of kind of flying through the stars. And that's cool. But, you know, being on, again, one of the Star Trek Enterprise ships, the Voyager or whatever, I'm yet to find one. I'm trying to ask a very famous Star Trek producer / writer whether or not he's had the dream, because he will have worked on more than 15 years of Star Trek productions. And I'm trying to figure out if he can, if he's had the experience. So let me just tell you what I do when I watch new theories. Typically. Again, if I'm watching a rehash of an old theory, I do come in with my bias because I've already done what I'm about to say. So if anyone shows me videos about how the ISS is real, it's a little tougher to do it, but I can still pretty much do it. And I think some of my friends who have been very convinced the ISS is fake. Again, they're canceling the program, of course, because it's a huge liability. But you go in, you get the theory, you have to get oriented first. So someone is trying to make a claim. And again, if it turns into a Hollywood production where someone is withholding information to create a climactic arc in my brain, your score for truth, or their score for truth, starts to go down drastically, automatically. You know, psyops are all based on the manipulation of your brain into a chemical state of suggestibility. The forest guy, again, baited you at the beginning to say, when this is very common, right? It's probably, like 60% of all the conspiracies videos on the internet, and I think we probably should just throw them all out. And even if they are true, we force the authors to remake their videos in a way that is not sensationalized, which is, I'm going to challenge you that you can't believe what I'm about to tell you. And then, boy, you really want to believe. And there's a little bit of that. I said in the last episode that I've aired, what if you controlled the universe and nobody told you? I try to be as straightforward as I possibly can in the sentence structure, right? But I'll get into a video, and I will try to adopt 100% what the presenter is trying to suggest to me. And I see how far my natural adaptation, suspension of disbelief, if that's required, has to be engaged and consumed to be able to believe something. And then I pull back. I take a deep breath, and I look at it again. Well, now it takes that first deep dive to understand the nuances and the depth of a claim. It's almost as if you're building a sculpture in your mind, a visual sculpture in your mind, which is the claim of a factual reality. And then you have to pull back and look at it and try to study the sculpture from sort of a shape standpoint in your brain. Does this make any sense? And I think that it's cool because there's been 3 or 4 listeners for the No Forest on Flat Earth theory that finally realized that when these trees came tumbling down, they would leave a mark, okay, if nothing else. We have this whole thing of what a meteorite looks like after it hits the surface of the Earth. And the meteorite that supposedly landed in Arizona was the size of a Greyhound bus. Again, probably traveling about 35,000 to 60,000 miles an hour. We don't know. And if it was truly an impact, and again, that thing is, I think it's a mile across, 3 miles around, and quarter mile down. It's a big crater, man. They would have thrown shit in the air for 100 miles. Would have been massive. And that's the size of a Greyhound bus. Now, again, we're talking about speed changes a lot of the damage that things do. But what do you think the velocity of a tree that's 60 miles high hitting the ground with, again, big hard branches that are made of big silicone, dried, granite? What do you think that blemish would be on the Earth? It was almost as if the Great Lakes were made out of the branches that scarred the Earth or something. It would be so devastatingly massive. A tree that's miles high? Well, what if it scarred the ground and created just craters that were remotely as deep as the branches are long? You'd have lakes all around. You'd probably have small little oceans that would be miles and miles deep. The deepest we've been able to dig into the ground, as far as I understand, is the Russians hitting about 45,000 feet down. A little over 8 miles or something like that. Maybe 10 miles. You have a tree that's 60 to 100 miles high hitting the ground. It would reach into space. I don't give a shit if you think we're on a dome or a globe. Or on a disc, I should say. They'd reach into the darkness of space. You'd be able to climb up there and just see whatever the hell we're doing. But then we know how the atmosphere works. Even if the Earth was 1/4 the size of expanding Earth was true, it's still so high that it would be, almost 300 degrees below zero up there. And that's when you start pulling back and looking at the theory and de-romanticizing and demystifying what the claim is. But folks, I think that the reason why we are so susceptible to fictional realities is that we sort of know we've been lied to so much by the official organizations on the other side of the spectrum, which is science with a capital S. Every once in a while I'll search on the internet for controversial topics related to conspiracies, debates, and that kind of stuff. And I ran into some science rag. It's some little crappy little website out there that essentially listed everything that you and I talk about. And every header topic, science is supposed to be very objective. It's supposed to be. It's supposed to say, well, maybe this could be true. But this was the most subjective list of subjects I've ever seen in my life, saying, this is fake, this isn't true, this is fake, this. It just was, every headline of all the subject matter that they were trying to outline. I think it was at bigthink.com, something like that. And it was so utterly biased, subjective, and insulting. it was anything but a debate. It was like, it was unbelievable. And for me, that's sort of Alex Jones's whole product, which is, in a good way, it's his whole thing about InfoWars. I'm going to mention this, and I don't mean any disrespect to Alex, because I think he's done more good than anything else in his life. But when his crew went to Half Moon Bay, California, which for those of you who don't know, take San Francisco, go south 30 miles, and that's the coast. It's right by Maverick Surfing Point. And they were on the beach. And I have best friends that used to live there. My kid used to live there. And so I've been there 100 times. But they were filming, radioactive seaweed, supposedly, and just trying to prove that Fukushima had reached the coast of California. And there was a very, very skeptical video where they had apparently buried something that had a lot of radioactive signature to it, and they were waving their Geiger counter all over the sand. They weren't getting any really drastic readings. And then you see this little hand come out of the nowhere and point at the ground. And then they move the Geiger counter over there, and boom, it totally spikes. And we grabbed that frame, put it on onepagenews.com, and basically called them out to say, wow, look at this transformation. At the exact moment in time that Alex Jones no longer makes any movies, they're now forging, it seems, on camera, data about radiation. Now, right now, if Fukushima was really what we think it was, now the coast should be completely littered with radioactive isotopes, because now it's had time to move around. And hell, maybe it is, I don't know. But now think about it. What if this crew knows that it's not quite here yet, but they have other evidence to believe that it is true, and so they forge data in an info war against those that would cover it up? I think that's a real slippery slope. I don't play any of those games, just so you know. I don't think I've got any videos that would remotely come close to that kind of behavior. There's no circumstantial proof of what I'm saying. It just looked very suspect. There was a recent prank video on YouTube that I want to bring up. And it was a guy that did it's been done 100 times, where they actually find some headhunting agency, or they put an ad in the newspaper, and they sucker a bunch of people to come in for an interview. And these poor folks need a job, and they're being suckered all day long in this thing. But this video was set up such that they would come into a morgue, which looked very, very real. Looked like they had rented some morgue or something to shoot this in. They had an actor laying on a steel gurney with the tarp over him, and the whole reveal was that they were going to usher the person in the room, say that this is the kind of organization you're working for, you're going to be a receptionist for this sort of work, so I just need you to know it seemed like they were pitching them a reality show, and that they were going to have to be participating in it, but they're going to do autopsies on live camera. It's all fake, right? So then the guy gets a cell phone call, leaves the room, leaving the person in the room, and then of course the guy wakes up from the sheet and pretends to, not know where he is. But most people, like 80% of the people, ran out screaming. But what was very interesting was this. And the reason why I bring this up is that my buddies gave me one of his books related on all of the psychiatrists for the last 120 years analyzing people's fear of death. And I'm going to this is a story about fear as it relates to the fictional game of reality. But this is a very fundamental example of how we walk around. Some people walk around in utter terror of death. These people walked in the room and had a cadaver in their mind, covered up tastefully. It wasn't real. And just the unbelievable terror in these people. Some of these guys are coming in, grown men wearing, unbelievable suits. They're very professional people, and some were, a lot of younger people, or, sort of you can tell why they haven't really dealt with reality yet. But they all the ones that were actually edited into the video were just immediately, they didn't know if they wanted to stay in the room, simply because there was a dead body in the room in their mind. This was a beautiful morgue. I mean, it wasn't like some weird dungeon-looking thing. Very clean, well lit. But for me, it beckoned to this book, because when I read this book, that my writing mentor gave to me, I was sort of just frustrated reading it because it seemed like there was a time when mankind was so terrified of death that the psychiatrists, who were all Freudian graduates, just lament on and on and on about how every person is afraid of death, and if you're not afraid of death, you're merely lying to yourself. Sort of insulting your ability to mature out of the arc of death. Hey, some of us aren't afraid of dying. We don't want to die, but we're not afraid of dying. So I'm one of the very first episodes I did with this camera, way before, well, it's not way before, maybe a couple weeks before I did my first Deep Thoughts episode last year, was me reviewing this book. Just no microphone. It was horrible, right? But I was very frustrated with the whole idea that these guys were asserting that society as a whole has got this fear of death, and that they were trying to suggest it was sort of a genetic code to be afraid of death. Now, there's obviously genetic codes for survival and not wanting to die. And if you're in some building and there's an earthquake, or there's something coming at you, a wild animal or someone who's crazy, your right brain's going to shut down, your left brain takes over, your adrenaline starts dropping in your body to numb your body from any pain so that you can withstand damage and continue to function. You go to your logical circuits in your brain to see things quicker. That's why when you're in a car wreck, things slow down, because your brain is going, I'm going to help you think as fast as humanly possible to save yourself, almost as if the designers of the universe built that into our bodies to make sure that their species has, when you need it, extra resources to pull this thing off, to stay alive. It doesn't mean necessarily that you're going to fear death. Now, I had a dream last night where I was hanging with this old guy, and it was just immediately the dream was there. I was up on this hillside with all these plush homes, and I was visiting a friend up there, and I ended up just walking up the street, and I saw this old guy sort of sitting on what I didn't realize was a cliff that fell really far down. It looked like 1/10 of a mile down. It was really intense. But there was no gusty winds or anything, so it was like this peaceful, calm moment when you could just fall off the edge of the Grand Canyon sort of thing. And I sat down with the guy, and I had my cell phone with me, and for some reason I had hooked it to a charger, and the cell phone had fallen out of my lap and was dangling over this chasm, being only held by the flimsy charger stuck in the base of it, right? I don't know if any phone could actually survive being hung by its cord for very long, but I'm looking at it, and I had this incredible fear that my phone was going to fall. And it was sort of like in the dream, I couldn't, it's like, God, if I lose my phone, it's going to be super hard to get back home or whatever. I don't know what the deal was, but I had this rush of fear that my phone was going to fall. And so I lean over, and I'm trying to time it such, because the cord was also suspended on my foot. And so if I were to lean over the wrong way, I'd add more momentum to the cord and my phone would fall. And so I put my right hand out and I said, hang on to me. You hang on to something, hang on to me. I'm going to get my phone and see if I can't scoop this thing up. And sure enough, he does it, and I grab the phone, and I don't lose it, and I immediately get up away from that. But at the moment I grabbed the phone, I looked down at the fall, and I thought, wow, I should probably be more afraid of falling off this cliff than trying to save a stupid phone that's about to fall off the cliff, right? I was like, where'd this cliff come from, right? The fear of death, the fear of the unknown, as I talked about in the unknown episode, I think is a hidden force that manipulates us to do whatever we can to feel comfortable. And maybe the science of it is that if you really get anxiety over waking up, that just temporarily speaking, you retreat to wherever you feel comfortable. And you realize, well, I'll come back when I gain more perspective, when I've pulled away and looked at it from more dimensions. One of our listeners, her name's Lori Gale, Lorigale. She has a really fun channel on YouTube. She just recommended this channel through the existentialism episode. Thank you so much, Lori. She made a great multi-part video where she just keeps turning her camera off and on about existentialism, and she's not only taken my video, she's taken tons of other videos on the subject and had deep conversations with the people that made the videos. And for me, it was one of her best videos she's ever made, and she added so many other perspectives to what is reality, what we are as individuals. But there's a cute point in the video where she really starts going down some beautiful thoughts of truly wondering if and she names this thing, which it escapes me at the moment, but it's I think she was looking for the word and couldn't quite place it, and I hadn't heard of the word either. But it was the theory that perhaps you are the entire universe, and you've merely created us to keep yourself entertained. I'm pretty sure that unless she's an echo of my id, she's real, and I'm real. But it's an interesting thing to think. But a couple times in the video, 3 or 4 times, she, I think, said, I'm going down this path and I feel like I sound crazy. And so she would sanction herself from sounding crazy. And for my money, she sounded more enlightened than she's ever sounded. I just loved it. Lori, I mean, it was fantastic what you were doing there. But that is, and it has to do with your own perception of yourself, because you have governors on your acceptability of reality that says this is crazy, this is not crazy. And boy, is that a tough barrier to cross. Take the analogy of the mountaintop as being all truth, whatever that is, right? The base of the mountain has half fairy tale stuff, and the other base of the mountain has science with a capital S. So if you go down the mountain to the bottom, you're going to live in a fictional realm. And it really beckons to the ignorant is bliss theory of life. Again, do no harm, you're probably fine, no matter what. I judge you not. There's a Johnny Depp movie, Don Juan DeMarco, or whatever the name thing is, and he's pretending to be Don Juan, and he's a gigolo for women in Los Angeles who want to have this amazing fantasy romance. But the only caveat to the film is that he actually believed and convinced himself that he was Don Juan, and the third act, I think, of the film starts off with him being forced to take a pill that removes that from him. He has to be himself. I remember watching that film being very frustrated because I was like, he's doing no harm. In fact, he's giving these women exactly what they need, which is to feel loved and feel appreciated and feel romanced and feel appreciated right down to their core, But what if, to get to the top of the mountain of truth, there's a belt around this mountain, this barrier, that says to cross this barrier, you're going to have to feel a little crazy. Talk about the snake eating its tail. Some people are going to argue with me, well, dude, you're unable to accept that mountains were trees. Not quite. Just go back to the beginning of this video and just play back what it would take to chop down these giant trees and what they would do when they fell, and all the things I said, right? When we remove everything that doesn't pertain to what we're talking about, whatever's left, we have to absolutely accept. But if you get into existentialism, you're thinking, oh my God, how do I even do that? Because what is the is? It's like Bill Clinton trying to get out of his latest rape case, and he's sitting there, in the 1990s going, well, what is the definition of is? What's is, man, I used to think everyone needed to know what I knew as a young child. You got to know what I know. You got to believe what I believe. I'm not even going to feel comfortable in the same room with you unless you believe what I believe. And as you get older and you spend more time with other people, you start to realize that's not really true. It's not true. If you're in the room where people are doing harm, then it's a little bit different. But even at that point, do we really have to change them? Or do we simply just say, well, maybe if that guy shows up, I don't show up. Maybe if that guy shows up, I just don't get engage in conversations with them. I think that's an immaturity that we have to get over. I think we have to be able to sit with folks that absolutely don't believe what we believe. It doesn't help when they get all emotional and butthurt about it, right? I know this episode's sort of all over the place. These are episodes that I make on the patio, and I think this will never see the light of day. And then I edit it together and I cut a few of the digressions out and I publish it. And someone will just say, oh my God, it's my favorite video of all time. We'll see if this one ever makes it out there. I'm just telling you right now, sitting out here in the patio, these are the videos that I just go, not so much. So let's summarize this thing real quick. Fictional realities. In my mind, currently, in I guess August of 2016, that means to me fantasy fairy tale on one side where pretty much anything can happen. You can just, if you can imagine it, it is reality. And hell, maybe that's the way it works. One of the things that Lori said was that we are creating this reality together, so we have to be careful how we create the splashes in the pond, the transverse waves of holographic existence, because when they collide with each other, if you have a bunch of negative people or terrified people, how does that affect your perception on reality? Maybe you're going to get terrified when you normally wouldn't because there's so many weird frequencies around you because people are buying the bullshit. I think that's very insightful and true. But the other side of the spectrum is certified religion known as science with a capital S, fortified by, again, tenure professors who will lose their jobs if what they are teaching suddenly becomes deprecated in the eyes of society. If it is no longer true, then they'll have to go and learn a new programming language. When you're an engineer or an artist, or even a musician for that sake, you will have to relearn new languages, new platforms on the computer side. You're going to have to learn brand new tools that come out on the visual side. I know a lot of friends of mine that are really good AutoCAD artists for interior design, and they are suddenly realizing that AutoCAD, most of them don't learn the 3D half of AutoCAD because it's really anal and weird. And there's other products like SketchUp, which are now almost $900 a copy. Google makes everything free except for SketchUp. SketchUp's got to have this ridiculous price tag. Before Logic was purchased by Apple, it was nearly $1,200, and now it's $200. So when you got the big bank, you should be able to make software cost nothing. But these folks are having to get into ArchiCAD and a bunch of other products just to keep their careers alive when they draft. Even though the forums that build things need elevation top-down drawings, which is all that these guys have learned in AutoCAD. But there's a popularity thing, right? If you're a musician, you remember when you used to come in and mic a studio, run a bunch of reel-to-reels, and just make an album in stereo with beautiful fidelity. Now it's like, oh, you got to learn Pro Tools, you got to learn, native instruments, you have to learn all these different pieces of software and the latest plugins, because that's what society's built out of, is academia. Art has become a left brain exercise. That's why people auto-tune. Well, you can't sing? Oh, which means you don't really have any talent in art? Well, that's no problem. We're going to do a left brain auto-tune on you, and suddenly you're a musician and you're a singer. But the fabric of reality that you wake up with every single day, it's hard to put it in a bottle. It's hard to put it in a container such that you know what is truth and what isn't truth. The science of discerning information is probably one of the Kubler-Ross. What is it? Denial, negotiation, anger, and acceptance. I just want to say, make sure that whatever you take into your cupboard of reality and yield as a true, false, or a maybe, that you really, really vet that stuff. The process should be fairly complex in your mind. George Carlin had a really funny phrase talking about how to get out of jury duty. He said, I get out of jury duty all the time because I go in there and I tell them I can spot a guilty person just like that. He had, fundamentally said, I just know exactly what is guilty and what isn't, who is guilty and who isn't. And, of course, the attorneys will throw you out if you have that opinion. I've meandered a little too long here. If you made it this far, thanks for listening. Thanks for all your comments. You guys are amazing. It's almost at a point now where it's at a really good sweet spot where I can get back to everyone really quick. If anything ever exploded, I can't even imagine how to respond to everyone. If you haven't been already, go to mkultraradio.com for all the feeds. If you're coming through audio, there's video, there's audio. We have so many good commenters. I just beg you to light up the comments on this particular one. methods that you use to discern what you look at. Even if you've never put them into words before, but you have a method, share that method. Just this step, comma, that step, comma, that step, comma, that step. And then maybe you come back to it later and you do 4 or 5 other steps, and maybe you vet the stuff over and over again. We are surrounded by people who are going to leave this world in a fictional reality. Probably most of them will do no harm to any one of us, so we shouldn't lose sleep over it. We shouldn't be angry at them or excommunicate them. For those that are a little more verbal, I would say because of the internet, you don't need to fight them directly. You just make your own video. You make your own blog. You leave your own comment. I look for people that knee-jerk reality. They knee-jerk changes to paradigms in reality. You can tell they haven't done any due diligence. You can tell they haven't looked at it from one way or the other. They're trying to attack you very quickly as opposed to hearing you, as opposed to doing a little more due diligence on their end. And they're simply fed up with the fact that everyone is lying at so many authentic, quote-unquote, levels. All the institutions that are supposed to be telling them the truth have been at least proven in several occasions to be lying. So how can you trust anything else they say? They're an Aesop fable of the boy that called wolf, right? I know you feel me. Take care of yourself and someone else. And I'll see you in the next Deep Thoughts. Over now.